Carry on, my wayward son. There'll be peace when you are done. Lay your weary head to rest. Don't you cry no more.
Today we will be reacting to the book Freakonomics by Stephen D. Levitt and Stephen J. Dubner, which in my unbiased opinion I think is a really great name and also a really great book. So I'll be doing some reactions and questions I had after reading the book, so stay tuned. My first reaction to the book, I think it's really enjoyable because it challenges conventional ideas for the audience. Like, for example, when it mentions Roe v. Wade as having more of an impact on crime and decreased crime in certain areas, I think that most people would think that it would be stricter gun laws or different police measures, but it actually takes what you come into the book, basically your preconceived notions, and it twists them on their head, and it says, you know, there's obviously a widespread idea that one thing is happening, but there's actually data on something that you might not have even thought of in a totally different area of life that is actually contributing more to the problem or to the solution than something you originally came in with. So even in the case like Roe v. Wade, where increased abortion was contributing to decreased crime in certain areas, I think that most people wouldn't have even thought of that idea. But the fact that they can present that evidence in such a, you know, mature and statistically sound way is really important, and it really speaks to the audience.
Don't you cry no more.
Instead of just spewing out information to the reader and presenting these ideas in such a way that's too complex for people to understand, because a lot of people don't have an economics background. And I think what's really interesting is that, take for example on page 169, it's talking about the discrepancy between white and black names and how there's a certain type of person that would name their child in a certain way, and instead of just presenting this idea, it actually gives you a list of the blackest names or the whitest boy names and girl names to show the reader that this isn't just something that's happening and you have to take the author's word for it. This is something that's happening, and here's the data to actually prove that this is happening. Forms of praise really contribute to the epigraph at the beginning of my presentation, because a lot of what people learn in economics is theory and different ideas that actually don't occur in real life, and a lot of people are just guessing how the federal government will react or how people will react, but the truth is that nobody really knows what's going to happen. You can only have a certain level of education and hope that this will actually pan out in real life. But what Freakonomics does is it takes things that are actually happening, gives you the data on how it's happening, and instead of morality where it's something ideal that would never actually be attainable, in Freakonomics it's something that is attainable because it's happening right now. I certainly have a few criticisms. My first piece of criticism would be that I think the authors insert their opinion a bit too much. One example of this would be when Dubner says a lot of discourse nowadays, especially in the political climate, is purely tit for tat, where people are trying to shout wrong and yell at people and not actually come back with real opinions and facts. Instead, they'll just try and be really argumentative. I think that they should have maybe stuck to ideas that are concrete and ideas that actually have quantitative backing to them, because when they start inserting their opinion, it makes the reader lose trust in what they're saying, because now we don't know what else could be their opinion in the book. Maybe all of that data is from one specific source, but another source would say contradictory data, so we don't really know what to believe. Another form of criticism I have for this book is that I feel like the authors may go too in depth into each specific example. Like for the case of the Ku Klux Klan example in their book, I think that they go a lot into the history of the Ku Klux Klan and what contributed to its rise, instead of maybe just focusing on what their argument was. I do understand that they want to give the audience a certain level of background on the issue, but I think that they could have attacked even more issues had they just stuck to what their argument was. 52, Levitt writes, quote, "Or more likely, it has become so unfashionable to discriminate against certain groups that all but the most insensitive people take pains to at least appear fair-minded, at least in public. This hardly means that discrimination itself has ended, only that people are embarrassed to show it." It's important to note the societal comment that Levitt is making in this statement. He's saying that basically people find it so rude and so out of style to be racist in public that they often keep these ideas and these views in their head, and they don't say it when they're in public, but they might actually express these views or hold these views in their private homes or talk about it with their friends. And I think that's often worse because these people have this pent-up aggression inside their head and these racist tendencies to actually show bias towards certain groups of people, but they will never admit that they're showing bias because they know the reaction they will get from people around them. So I think this also contributes to a question that I have, is that are people still as racist as they once were, and they're just holding these ideas in their head, or are we actually progressing as a society? Because Levitt never actually answers this question. He only hints that people still hold these views in their head and they just don't say it. But I would like to know what he thinks about racial profiling or different issues that we are dealing with now and how they relate to issues that we were dealing hundreds of years ago. Obviously, our society has shifted in the fact that we are now allowing all different races to compete, to get jobs, all different kinds of stuff, and everyone is on the same playing field, we would like to think, but that's not often the case. And I would like to know, that I haven't found out from this book, the statistics on how people feel. Maybe an anonymous poll would help on a public opinion on how people feel about our racial tendencies now versus how they were 100 years ago. I'm sure they would be much different now, but would they be that much less severe than they were? I thought this book was extremely compelling, and it definitely raised a bunch of questions in my head. One, for example, I would say is when I'm paying attention to politics, I often see that, say, a new policy on stricter gun laws was implemented. Is that actually the right thing to solve the issue of school shootings and mass shootings? And is that going to be most effective in the long run? I don't know anymore, because I often just think that these are politicians, these are elected officials. I think they know what the proper course of action would be. But just because we put our faith in someone doesn't mean that they're looking at all options. I mean, I'm not saying that Levitt and Dubner were right in saying that more abortions would then contribute to less crime, but I'm saying that I think people should at least explore all different options and see what, if something's not working, that there needs to be a fix. And it's not often the fix that's right in front of your face, but you definitely need to do the research, complete different project polls to see how people think, and look at the data before you're going to make a decision. And I think that that's a really important skill that this book has brought to light for me.